This is a long dead rotten tree, shouldn't be too hard. Fighting in a hill forest like this would be rather inconvenient, even more inconvenient than regular fights, because the footwork here is really difficult. Very assaulting branches here, it seems. This is really thin, so the blade should be able to cut that in one swing. There we go. Partially broke it, but still, that's all right. Time to go a little harder to see if anything loosens up. That glance is a bit too much. Oh, damn. The way the handle transfers force is really... Wait, what? That doesn't sound right. I'll bring you closer so you can hear that. I'm acting as if the camera is an actual person. Oh well, I have an audience, that's okay. I can be a little eccentric, right? So, can you hear that clicking? Oh. The creaking is worse, actually. That I do not like. Whoa. I'm not sure what happened. Those weren't even particularly hard strikes. Not a good sign. Also bent. It's off center.